we are going to win threshold cryptography and interoperability because we're built on Sui, right? If we decided to, go with someone else, and someone would, copy our tech and just do it on Sui and be better than us, right? So this is the best motivator. The best motivator is if you want to win, you need to use the best infra. And I think if we look at things like privacy, things like, there are a lot of big categories in Web3 that all of them inevitably will be coordinated on Sui, because if you don't do it, then your competitor will, and they will be better, right? Eventually, this is like the biggest driver of innovation is, where is the best tech? Where can I create the best results? And that's why I think Sui will win. And in the next year, we are going to see more and more of these type of use cases coordinating on Sui. So yeah, this is, it's a pretty easy prediction to make, because this is how a competitive market works.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Just the Metrics podcast. Today, we are joined by David Lachmish, co-founder of Ika Protocol. Ika is pioneering the idea of trustless cross-chain interoperability. This is a revolutionary concept that will reshape the way blockchain interoperability works today. In this episode, we'll explore how Ika utilizes Sui protocol to bring this seamless cross-chain experience to the Web3 ecosystem. So let's get started. David, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it, and looking forward to our chat.
So first of all, I've been for a long time a huge fan of Ika Protocol, and this is one of the protocols that excites me when I think about the projects that building on top of Sui Network. The solution you're building addresses like one of the biggest problems in the blockchain space. That is like how to interact with another blockchain, assets on another blockchain in a trustless manner. So before we dig into the details of the solution you're building, could you talk a bit about your background and how someone like you decided to work on this particular problem in the blockchain space?
Absolutely. So I've been an entrepreneur for a pretty long time now, over 15 years, mostly Web 2, and in the areas of cybersecurity, deep tech, AI. This is also the background of, I'm one of 3 co-founders. So my 2 co-founders, Omer and Yohanatan, also come from a very deep cybersecurity and cryptography background. Omer, my co-founder, he created an entire new category in cybersecurity and founded a cybersecurity unicorn in the API security space. And Yohanatan, he did his math degree when he was in high school, and he's a brilliant researcher and cybersecurity researcher and cryptography researcher. So this is kind of the background. Also, a lot of people on our team come with very strong backgrounds, either from academia or from intelligence organizations. So we're really, I believe that we have one of the best cryptography teams in the world, even outside of Web3, but definitely within Web3. So that's kind of the background. And when we, I've been an avid Web3 user and believer for many years personally, but I couldn't really find something that I was excited doing in the Web3 space. It seemed like a lot of the big problems were already tackled by a lot of different teams, and I couldn't really find, we as founders, we couldn't really find anything that really got us very excited. But then 3 years ago, when we decided to start D-Wallet Labs, which is the company behind Ika, we figured out that there is a very big problem that no one was able to solve, and actually required a new type of tech, new cryptography, new breakthroughs in order to be able to solve. And that problem is the interoperability problem. And you mentioned that this is very unique, and I agree. All of the existing solutions that before Ika that attempted to solve this problem were very problematic. You see the end results of assets being hacked, right? There are billions of dollars that were hacked from bridges and other interoperability solutions. But the reason that that happened is because there are a few flawed assumptions and flawed fundamentals in how this was addressed. So if we look at blockchain, blockchain has a very, very strict security requirement. It's probably the most fundamental security guarantee that a blockchain gives a user, which is a zero trust security guarantee. So if you have I was just punching holes into like a 24 word chart, like the metal charts. So if you have like a seed phrase, you know that no one can take away your assets. No one can generate a signature on your behalf. It's cryptographically secure. You don't have to trust anyone. You don't have to trust the validators or the miners. It doesn't matter. Even if all of them try to collude and steal your assets, they won't be able to do it. So that is a very, very, very basic, strict security guarantee that all of the blockchain industry is built on. The problem is when you want to interoperate, when you want to operate across multiple blockchains, you lose that guarantee. And that starts to, to break things in cybersecurity, and especially in complex cybersecurity systems like blockchains. When you remove something so fundamental, then everything starts to crumble, and it creates a lot of attack vectors. So what you have today is mostly bridges. There are different types of bridges. It could be based on MPC or on cross-chain messaging or on a centralized custodian, but the concept is always the same. You need to trust a specific third party or a group of third parties with your assets, and they issue a derivative for you that represents your asset that you don't no longer hold. And then that can create a lot of attacks. And we saw very, very large hacks of that being exploited. So when we looked at this problem, we said, okay, interoperability is a big problem. It's only going to become bigger because there are going to be more and more, chains, app chains, different environments, different places, private blockchains, enterprise blockchains. There's going to be all these different ecosystems. Each one of them is siloed. The problem of needing to interoperate between them is going to become bigger and bigger, and the tech doesn't exist. We need to create new tech in order to solve it. So that was a very interesting problem that we wanted to solve. And I'm happy to say that after a few years of very hard work, we were able to solve it.
It's when you just said like we were able to solve it, but when you first thought about its problem, like what was your thought process? Like how were you actually approaching this from a first principles perspective?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and I think this is also the way that you need to approach something when you want to build a serious infrastructure that can be used on scale. So when you start building a complex or even any cybersecurity system, you need to start with what are your requirements. So you create a list of requirements, and then ideally you want to build a solution that fills all of the requirements. But if you can't, then you need to start thinking, what are the trade-offs between the requirements? What requirements can I maybe be more flexible on in order to, maybe fulfill other requirements? So if we boil it down, there was a very, very long list of requirements. But if we boil it down, I think we can talk about 4 major things that were important for us. The first one, we'll start with the more trivial ones. The first one is speed, latency. So if you want to build infrastructure that is very generic, very flexible, can be used in a lot of different use cases, can be the backbone of interoperability, then you need to make sure that it's relevant. And if you don't have low latency, then you rule out a lot of different use cases. So that was something important. We wanted to get to ideally sub-second latency, which when we started 2 years ago, by the way, was almost science fiction. The other requirement was high throughput. If you want to be infrastructure for all the interoperability in the world, then you need to be able to support a lot of activity, right? You need to scale together with the activity. So that was another requirement. The third requirement was decentralization. A lot of the interoperability, I would say all of the interoperability solutions today are not decentralized, definitely not sufficiently decentralized. I would say maybe some of them are a bit distributed, so they have like federations, but it's far from being decentralized the way that you would want to. So that was an important criteria. And the fourth one, which was the most difficult one, was zero trust security. So we wanted to make sure that the user doesn't need to trust the operators, and nothing can happen without the user. So that avoids, that avoids the problem of a honeypot, where an attacker knows that if they can gain access, then they can drain all of the users' assets, and it is eventually reduces both the attack surface, but also the motivation to attack. So that was a very, very important. And all of those four requirements were not possible, either any one of them, with the existing solutions. So all the existing interoperability solutions are slow, they have high latency, they have low throughput, they're not decentralized, and they don't have zero trust security. So it was a tall order to be able to solve all of those problems. But yeah, that was kind of the challenge, and this was the mindset of how we started. Set out the requirements and now start to design a solution that would be able to meet all those requirements.
As you said, it's a long list of huge challenges, right? So how did you work through that list? So what was that process? So, okay, now we are going to do that. Like, we have this huge list of like a huge mountain to climb. How did you work through that?
So it was an interesting process. At first, we have some experience and knowledge in cryptography, but as founders, we're far from being like, the top cryptography experts in the world. So we started, going through our network and talking to very, very talented cryptographers, and described like what we want to achieve and the ways we were thinking about different models of how we can achieve that. Some cryptographers told us, what you're trying to do it's impossible. It's too much, just give up, do something else. Which obviously we didn't choose to work with those cryptographers. But there were some who, were very intrigued and interested in the challenge, and we started working with them to test out a few different approaches. And with cryptography research, it's in research in general, but definitely cryptography research, when you're trying to do something novel, you never really know, first of all, if you're going to succeed and how you're going to succeed if you actually do. So it was a lot of optimism and kind of belief in our ability and the ability of very talented people that we know and are working with us. But also there was a lot of frustration along the way, right? Because we could come with this list of requirements, and then the cryptographers would work on something and say, okay, we were able to do this, and we were like, wait, but this is not it can't scale like with a number of parties. It can be decentralized. Oh yeah, of course it's not decentralized, but it checks all the other boxes, and we're like, no, we need to check all of the boxes. We can't just, okay, but if you want it to be decentralized, then it can't have low latency. We're like, no, we need low latency, and we need it to be decentralized, and we need everything. So it was a bit of a kind of pushing a lot of very talented researchers to the limit, and it was a very long process. So we actually didn't really complete our first version of 2PC MPC, which is our cryptography scheme that we created. We didn't finish that until almost 2 years after we started working. So it was a very, very, very long process, and very kind of ups and downs, frustrating, exciting, a lot of different emotions. But yeah, eventually we were able to actually complete the challenge.
What was the breakthrough? What was the key breakthrough moment when you thought, oh yeah, we got a hold on this problem and we are solving it? What was it?
So first of all, I would say that even after you have like these breakthrough moments, it's always ups and downs, because you have this breakthrough and you figured out something, and the cryptographer is checking it and it actually works. And then a week later, one of the cryptographers is like, no, I broke it. Like, it's broken. I found like you can't, and then you need to rethink, right? And then, so it's always like, even when you have these breakthrough moments, and I like literally every single time, someone found something that breaks it, right? Like until you can find something that you can prove mathematically that is secure, it's a very, very, very long, tiring process, a lot of tweaking. But I would say that kind of the watershed moment was when we were able to take this naive design that we had in mind of 2PC MPC. So when we started, we said, okay, how can we have this zero trust? How can we make sure that the user is always required? So we thought of this concept of having this nested MPC where you have a two-party computation between the user and the network itself is operated by MPC. So now we have this structure where you can enforce logic through the network, but the user is also always required. So that was kind of our when we started, it was much more naive in terms of like the design, but this was what we wanted to achieve. And we started to think about different ways of doing it, and there were a lot of issues. Just for instance, right, one of the biggest issues was the maintenance issue. So if you have, think about like, 1,000 validated signers, right, in the Ika network, and each one of them needs to keep, let's say you have 1 billion users. Okay, we want to scale to, support the entire world. Let's say you have 1 billion users. Each user has at least one user share, right, of a D-wallet. This is how we call the primitive. But you can even have like each user having 10 or 100 of them, right? Now, every validator needs to manage billions and billions and billions of shares for every D-wallet of every user, that it becomes unmanageable. So even like when you have this naive design, you have all these problems of how are you actually going to manage it in a way that is scalable, right? We talked about supporting all the infrastructure of the world. So I think the kind of the big moment was when we nailed that design. So we're using something called threshold homomorphic encryption, which is a very elegant way of essentially having every Ika signer only hold one share to a threshold homomorphic encryption key. And all of the network shares of all of the users of all of their D-wallets will all be encrypted to that key. And the algorithm itself, 2PC MPC, works through threshold homomorphic encryption together with the user in order to generate the signature. So it's a very, very kind of elegant solution. And when we came up with it and started figuring out that it might be possible, so we also had to create the first threshold. Palier is like a homomorphic encryption scheme. So we had to create the first scalable threshold version because there were no scalable threshold versions of that. So there were all these things, but the moment it kind of came together and we're like, okay, we can actually do that, and that checks a lot of the boxes, then I think we were much more certain. We had like plan B, plan C, plan D. Once we kind of achieved that, we were like, okay, we can probably go with plan A.
So it's like you reached a solution which was like mathematically provable that it works, and it none of you couldn't break it. So it was that moment, right?
Yeah, something like that. And also, it's not just when you theoretically something is mathematically secure, it's use is secure in cryptography. Usually, that's the term you use. Then you know that maybe you can implement it wrong. You can do a lot of things that are wrong, but the concept itself is sound.
So you mentioned the like multi-party computation and 2PC MPC algorithm, D-wallet, Ika network, which is a group of solutions, right? So could you break down that architecture of the solution?
Sure. So the 2PC MPC scheme protocol, that's the cryptographic scheme that we developed, and Ika network is the network that is implementing that scheme in order to enable this new primitive, this new building block that we call the D-wallet. So 2PC MPC is kind of the you can think about it like in Starknet you have ZK snarks, right? That's like the cryptographic scheme that is used in order to generate proofs. So 2PC MPC is our cryptographic scheme. Ika is the network that implements it, and D-wallet is the primitive, the building block that is enabled by Ika utilizing 2PC MPC. So 2PC MPC, as we said, is a cryptographic scheme that allows a centralized party, so a user, plus a distributed party, so a network, to generate a signature together. So you can perform through this protocol a process called DKG, distributed key generation, which means a private key never exists, but you can create a public key together. So the user and the network create a public key, and none of them have the full key. So the user knows that the network cannot sign without them, it has zero trust, but the network can also prevent the user from signing, which means you can enforce logic as a protocol. So you can create custody protocols, you can create DeFi protocols, and the network, the user won't be able to double spend. The user won't be able to do whatever they want because the network will enforce the logic. So that's 2PC and PC. Ika is the network of signers that actually implements that. So it's a proof of stake network. Signers will have to stake Ika tokens in order to become signers, and then they will participate in the protocol and generate signatures together with users. And the D-Wallet, that's a primitive that is used by Sui smart contract developers in order to utilize this tech. So now utilizing this D-Wallet primitive, you can have this decentralized signing mechanism that can control assets on any chain, and you can write whatever logic you want in order to enforce whether or not a signature will be generated.
And you said it's like a proof of stake network of Ika. And so basically, how does this network leverage? So like a D-Wallet primitive, the way I understand it, it's like an object.
I can explain how it connects to Sui.
Yeah.
So, much like a walrus, Ika coordinates on Sui. So it uses Sui as a coordination layer. So the Ika token is on Sui. When you want to stake Ika tokens, you do it on Sui. We have a smart contract on Sui. When you want to pay for using Ika, you need to do that on Sui. You pay Ika tokens on Sui. And all of the state of the network, so the signers kind of, they generate signatures and they create, we also have blocks. We're using Mysticeti as the consensus, and it's not exactly consensus, it's more a communication channel between all of our signers, because they need to communicate as part of the MPC protocol. So all of their messages, all of the state of Ika is written on Sui. So we use Sui as kind of our global coordination layer, and it's very, very similar to how Walrus does that. And what we also enable is our tech to be used by Sui smart contract developers. So we use the proof of stake in order to make sure that we are a permissionless network. So in order to become a signer, you need to have some sort of stake. So that's kind of why. But it's not an L1 or an L2 or anything like that, because you don't write smart contracts on Ika. You write them on Sui. And one of the reasons, there are a lot of reasons why we chose Sui. But when I talked about the 4 requirements that we had, we knew that we would need to be able to implement them both for the cryptography protocol, which is 2PC and PC, but also for the network itself. So we would need a network that can actually support this type of latency and throughput and decentralization. And 3 years ago when we started, this was not possible with any of the existing networks. So whether it's Ethereum or Solana or Cosmos or Polkadot or all the networks that existed back then, they didn't even get close to our requirements. So our assumption was that we would actually have to build our own network in order to fulfill those requirements on the network side as well, not just on the cryptography side. But we started with the cryptography, which I'm happy that we did, because while we were doing that, Sui were solving all of these problems on the network side. And when we were ready, with the cryptography breakthroughs, Sui was already live, and we could look at their tech. And for the first time in Web3, we actually saw tech that we can use as infrastructure. And I think this is one of the most powerful things about Sui that a lot of people don't understand, is that when you want to build a very, very serious infrastructure, you need something like Sui in order to support it in Web3, because or you need to build your own new thing for your specific infrastructure. And I think Walrus and Ika are very good examples of super serious projects really great infrastructure that is coordinated on Sui, but we will just see more and more of these because at the end of the day, we all want real world activity to move to Sui and or to Web3 in general. And I think Sui is the way that that is going to happen. But that's kind of a side note. So this is the connection between Sui and Ika. And yeah, if you have any more specific questions, I'm happy to dive deeper.
This is a totally interesting architecture in the sense that, we have heard about the side chains and L2s and all that. It's first time a group of validating nodes on top of a layer one blockchain that really inherits the security and the other features of that particular protocol without having to reinvent the wheel on another layer.
So you can think about it. The best way to think about it is this. In a smart contract network, usually what is coordinated is on-chain activity. So you have a smart contract, you have tokens, you have DEX, right? You have all these things that happen on-chain, and they are coordinated on the network. If you look at off-chain activity, right, things like storage with Walrus, right, things like threshold cryptography, threshold signatures with Ika, those things are much harder to coordinate on-chain because you need to have, because things are happening off-chain, you need to have really crazy performance, but not just amazing performance. You also need to have a very straightforward way of managing, for example, access control for being able to do things in parallel. Like there are all these different requirements. And if we try to do what we're doing on Sui now on any other network, it just wouldn't work. Like it would completely destroy all of the breakthroughs that we had in our cryptography to make sure that cryptography is super fast, and like that would just destroy all of that. And also in terms of the security of, Sui has this object data model that is really intuitive in terms of access control. So you mentioned like the D-wallet is like an object on Sui. So in order to control the network share of a D-wallet, we just have a D-wallet cap, a D-wallet capability on Sui that can be held by any object. And it's just very, very, very kind of strict. You don't need to like design this really, really complex architecture to get around, bad design. So I think this is something that the off-chain the coordination of off-chain use cases is going to be something that Sui is already excelling at, but will just it will be more and more clear and visible. And a lot of the real world Web2 use cases would require the coordination of off-chain activities if you want to move them on-chain, because they won't happen directly on-chain. A lot of things are too complex and too expensive to happen directly on-chain, or maybe even impossible to actually happen on-chain. Things like threshold cryptography can't happen on-chain because then all the secrets are available, right? You have to have secrets, and that needs to happen off-chain. So off-chain activity is going to be, I believe, more and more coordinated on Sui Network, and a lot of the Web2 real-world adoption will happen through that.
Like going back to the original solution, I want to, I have some Bitcoin or I have some ETH. How can I interact with these digital assets using Ika protocol from Sui? So what is that like in user flow? Like how can I think about this particular interaction? Because as of now, you have wormhole, all these bridges, I bridge the asset, then I get a wrapped asset. Like you changed all that paradigm. So how does it work actually in that from a very user-centric point of view?
So I think a good way to think about that is, first of all, we need to understand that Ika is very, very low-level infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that users will mostly, 99.9% of the time, will not interact directly with Ika. They will, unless they're power users, they would usually interact with tech that is powered by Ika. And that is, first of all, it would abstract a lot of the complexities, but also it means that what we're doing is we're creating a very useful primitive for builders to be able to create better, more useful products. So that's kind of the premise. And now we can go on how that actually looks like. And so first of all, I'll start by saying that the fact that we created, the most robust, performant, zero trust solution, it is also very flexible. So you don't actually need to use it in a zero trust way. There are use cases where maybe people would prefer doing it without zero trust, right? For certain, we don't have to get into it exactly, but automated use cases, for example, where you don't want the user to have to actually approve every action, but you want, something else to take actions on their behalf. Maybe they would prefer Ika to do that because Ika is also decentralized, right? So then what we're doing is we're giving all of the optionality for developers. So developers can build their user experience, can build the trade-offs in terms of security, can build whatever they want and use it in the most flexible way possible. And you mentioned wormhole, right? I believe that a lot of the bridges of the future will actually, change their model. But the traditional bridging, at least in the, let's call it the medium term, until the paradigm is completely shifted, will run on top of Ika because it creates the most performant and decentralized infrastructure also for bridges, also for non-zero trust use cases. So, I think in the long term, it doesn't make sense to have bridges, right, in the long term. But until the industry moves to that point, I think bridges will just run on top of Ika. So that's, that's a good way of looking at it. In terms of how it will look like for the user, we can take a few different use cases and kind of explore how they would look like. So the most basic, fundamental, straightforward use case is custody. Today, custody solutions are either decentralized but limited to a certain chain. So multi-sigs, Gnosis safe, things like that. You create a smart contract on a specific chain, and then you have decentralized custody, but only limited to one chain. And then you have things like centralized custodians or MPC custodians. Maybe you've heard of Fireblocks, Copper, things like that. So they offer either a service where you trust them entirely with the keys and the assets and everything, and they manage it for you, or with MPC custodians, you share custody with them. So they keep half of the key, you keep half of the key. It's a bit more complex than that, right? It's usually 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3 or something like that. But essentially, no one holds the full key, and this is how the assets are custodied. And they enforce access control on their share. So you define the policies, but they can't sign without you. And even if they're compromised, nothing can be stolen. So this is kind of the industry standard, I would say, today, using something either like Gnosis Safe for a single chain or Fireblocks for multi-chain, but centralized. What we wanted to do in custody is to enable this new hybrid. So both multi-chain and decentralized. And there are already a few teams that are building these types of solutions, utilizing Ika. Aeon is a good example. Holonym are also building something that they call human wallets. So they're also including their own tech to derive more human-friendly keys from biometrics and things like that. But they're using Ika as the backbone in order to enforce access control and in order to control assets on other chains. So both Aeon and human wallets are building their smart contract, their policy on Sui, and utilizing Ika as this infrastructure for their custody solution. So custody is very straightforward. You, as the user, have like half of the signing power. The network has the other half, and you can enforce the access control policies on the network side. So I can share access with you to my account, for example, and you would only be able to withdraw, let's say, $100 a week because the network will enforce that. And then there can be a lot of other like security measures and things like that. So that's custody. I think it's a very powerful, big use case, a huge market. Just as an example, right? Aeon are two very talented builders that they raised some money from VCs, but they basically built a competitor to Fireblocks and Gnosis Safe by themselves without cryptographers, without like a huge team, without a lot of funding. This is a level of enablement that Ika and Sui creates. It really reduces the barrier to compete with these giants. Where, you know, to think about competing with Fireblocks or Gnosis Safe before this existed, right? It was a huge endeavor, and now anyone can build their own niche. You know, I believe that there are going to be a lot of niche custody solutions, like custody for DAOs, custody for small businesses, custody for retail users, custody for project treasuries. And everyone will be able to just create their perfect product because all of the infrastructure, all of the security is already figured out. Another very big use case that a lot of people are interested in is Bitcoin programmability. So because D-Wallets allow you to enforce your logic and control any asset on any chain, regardless of whether there's a smart contract on that chain, Bitcoin is very interesting. Bitcoin is the largest asset class and it doesn't have smart contracts. So there's a lot of capital inefficiency. And today, the solutions that you have all require you to transfer your Bitcoin to a bridge, to a custodian, to someone else, and receive a derivative, which is very bad from a lot of different perspectives, right? Security, of course, but also in terms of regulation, tax consequences, things like that. These are things that institutions are very interested in and are very concerning to institutions. So you basically see that there's a very low adoption for wrapped Bitcoin, things like that. And what you can do with D-Wallets is create a new class of protocols, of products that enable you to enforce your logic directly on native BTC on Bitcoin without removing it, without creating a derivative. Maybe the basic example would be lending and borrowing. I can take native BTC. It can be in my D-Wallet. So that means I have the user share. No one can sign anything without me. But there's a network share that can enforce logic. So I can lock that BTC as collateral for a loan. It stays on Bitcoin. It doesn't leave my D-Wallet, but still I can get a loan against it. And I can agree on the future liquidation terms and sign a future transaction specifically to the lender that if those liquidation terms are met, then he gets my entire account with a Bitcoin. This is another thing we haven't talked about, but D-Wallets are also transferable. For the first time, you can transfer an entire account. And that opens up very interesting and compelling options for institutions, but for any BTC holder that doesn't want to give up their Bitcoin, but does maybe want to make it a bit more capital efficient and leverage it in order to make use of it and not just keep it locked in a vault somewhere. So that's there's already a team. They're, I think, emerging now out of stealth. They're called Ray. I think Ray Finance, or RHEI. I'm not sure they're completely out of stealth yet, but probably by the time we air it, they will be. And so they're building things around lending, not just against Bitcoin, by the way, against entire accounts. So staking positions. You can leverage your staking position in a loan without going through a liquid staking token, which also creates risk. And a lot of institutions are very wary of LSTs. So all of these things are now enabled alongside things that are more, kind of straightforward, like multi-chain atomic swaps. I can take my Sol on Solana, you have your BTC on Bitcoin, and we can swap. The BTC stays on Bitcoin, my Sol stays on Solana, and everything is facilitated through a smart contract on Sui. So that is, kind of the things around Bitcoin programmability specifically, but also more generally multi-chain DeFi that are enabled by Ika. So from the end user perspective, if I go back to the original question, this is how they would experience Ika as Rails for these new use cases that solve a lot of problems for them, that create better security for them, that lets them do things without needing to take a lot of risk. And I believe this new class and this new wave of solutions that will be built on Sui through Ika is going to be, are going to be some of the biggest projects in Web3 in the next few years.
Yeah, this is a this is almost like that quote, like the best technology would feel like magic, or I can't remember the quote exactly, but uh, this is like there's some use cases that you couldn't really do like before that without a centralized solution, or something even with centralized solution. And
Yeah. By the way, the way that we like to frame it is that crypto will win when it becomes boring. So right now, crypto is super interesting, and everyone knows like what ZK is and what this is and that, and consensus and L1 and L2. But when crypto is just boring and it just works under the hood, you don't even know you're using crypto, that is when crypto actually wins. And I think this is where we're going with, right? To create very useful infrastructure that people can create an interface on top of it that maybe you don't even know you're using crypto. Definitely you don't know you're using Ika and Sui, but it just works.
yeah, that's exactly what we want. There's this, this like endless bickering in Twitter about other protocols. It basically happens because the infrastructure is not there to support this kind of use cases, and we don't have that UX, right? You don't really.
Yeah, I think that right now crypto is very interesting because it's mostly narrative, right? You don't have like the real tech that can be the scalable. I mean, now you have it, but until very recently you didn't have it. And so everything was around narrative. And so everyone needs to be smart, needs to understand the tech. But think about Web 2, right? How many people actually understand how the internet works, how email works, how, right? Like the vast majority of people don't understand that, and they don't need to understand it, right? And it when it becomes boring, it means that it just works and you can get to mass adoption. If you need to learn, like to go through 3 months of just learning how to, set up your account or move between chains, or what is this chain, what is that chain, and do your own research and all of that, then it will only be relevant to a very, very small segment of, humanity.
And Sui has built all of the rest of the stack, like this CK login or sponsored transaction, all of that. Like Ika can leverage it just like that. You don't have to reinvent that. And that brings a whole new different kind of UX that a lot of other chains does not have, without compromising the core quality, that is trustlessness. That is, I think that was a really a brilliant decision in that sense, to go for a network which has all these stack ready for you.
Absolutely. And I think, by the way, Sui is obsessed with developer experience, and they come from Web 2. You can see like the mentality of, uh, if you create good infrastructure for developers, that eventually you will get the best developers. And what you really need is not a lot of developers. I mean, a lot of developers is nice, but you need the best developers. And the best developers will choose the best infrastructure. So Sui is obsessed not just with like great developer experience, but also with creating primitives that are useful for good developers who want to develop really useful things. So I definitely think, yeah, for us, it was a no-brainer. I always say that if Sui didn't exist, we would have had to invent it ourselves. So for us, it was definitely a no-brainer. And we're just very thankful and grateful that, the Mission Labs team were focused on solving all these problems so we can add our very important piece of infrastructure to this puzzle that is now starting to be created around the Sui ecosystem.
Okay. Going back to the one point that you mentioned about this cross-chain atomic swaps, it's pretty cool. But how does this atomic cross-chain swap work? It sounds like magic, but what are the kind of things involved in that? In the sense that how fast would it be? Would it be as fast as Mysticeti, like that kind of latency, or because other chains have different kind of latency, like Bitcoin has, like I had to wait like 10
So
minutes. So how does that work from the latency user experience perspective, like at this atomic swaps?
So first of all, there are a lot of different ways to implement that, but maybe I will talk about two ways to implement it, and then through the difference between them, you'll understand the different designs and capabilities. So one way, which is probably the most naive way of implementing it, is saying you have a D wallet with Solana, I have a D wallet with Bitcoin, and we want to swap Bitcoin and Solana. What you would do is you would create a signature transferring your Bitcoin from, I don't remember if you have Bitcoin or I have Solana, but let's say you have Bitcoin. You're transferring your Bitcoin on BTC from your address to my address, from your D-Wallet to my D-Wallet. I'm signing a transaction to transfer my Solana from my Solana address D-Wallet to your D-Wallet Solana address. And each one of us signs half of the transaction because we only have the user share. And then the network will only complete both transactions once both of us signed. So that's the atomicity, right? So in this scenario, right, Bitcoin has finality time of, let's say, at least 10 minutes, but usually wait between 30 and an hour, right, to have full finality. Solana, it's debatable, but let's say a few seconds. And then, the signature is atomically created. So the signature is submitted, so you know that it can't be double signed, it can't be withdrawn, anything like that. But the actual finality, takes as much as the network does. So that's one way of implementing it. Another more interesting way of implementing it is saying you have a D-Wallet with Sol, with Solana, right? I have a D-Wallet with Bitcoin, and we want to swap. What if you gave me your D-Wallet and I gave you my D-Wallet, right? That is something that happens completely on Sui. Now you have Bitcoin, BTC on Bitcoin, which I don't have access to anymore. And I have Sol on Solana, which you don't have access to anymore. Well, we got to the same end result, but now all we did is a Sui transaction that had like sub-second finality, and we got to the same result. And again, we're talking about like a very naive, like now when you want to design that, you want to design an entire system. So how does it work with an order book and market makers? And we're also talking to, Deepbook, for example, to integrate these kind of things. But so the full system is much more complicated, and there are a lot of different ways to implement it and different trade-offs. But you can now understand that this new primitive, this D-Wallet, which you can think about like an asset, opens up like a lot of different ways of thinking about things. If I can transfer an entire account, maybe I can rethink a lot of different use cases, and maybe I can implement them in a different way.
Yeah, this is this is the kind of magic with the Sui objects, right? This is the kind of access controls and all those things that comes with the Sui infrastructure that enables that kind of solution.
So yes, I agree. It's the Sui objects, and it's also the 2PC MPC algorithm.
Yep.
So the reason that accounts can be transferable for the first time in history is because we have this new structure that is not controlled by right? It's not controlled completely by the network. It's not controlled completely by the user, and it can always switch around. So if we take like a very basic D-Wallet transfer, let's say right now I created a D-Wallet, right? So I hold the user share, only I know it. No one knows like the network share because it's encrypted to a threshold, so no one knows that. And I have a D-Wallet cap, right? That's the capability that determines whether or not the network will sign. Okay, so I control everything. Right now, I'm the only one who can determine what the D-Wallet will sign. Now, if I want to transfer this D-Wallet to you, the first thing I'll do is I will take the user share. I will encrypt it to your public key. Now, also you have access to the user share, right? But both of us have access to the user share. But I'm the only one who's controlling what the network share will sign. Now what I do, I take this D-Wallet cap controlling the network share, and I transfer it to you. Now both of us have access to the user share, but only you can control what the network share signs. This effectively transferred the D-Wallet. But then once we do that, you can reshare. So now you can invalidate my old user share. So I have zero access. I don't have the user share. I don't have the network share. And you have both the user share and control of the network share. So this is something that just was not possible before because this structure didn't exist. You couldn't have if you have a private key, then someone has a private key. If you have a share, then someone has that share. You can't actually effectively do a transfer of these things without having to trust someone along the process. So this is the first time you can actually, in a completely decentralized, trustless way, transfer ownership of entire accounts. This is a really groundbreaking concept.
It's truly is. And like when you especially going back to the idea of a Bitcoin, like it's a very it's the biggest asset in the whole blockchain space. It's the biggest crypto asset, but it's an asset class which is very dormant, right? I mean, it's in a sense that people like the typical hodl it, that kind of and most of the Bitcoiners are that like in that kind of philosophy. But when you pitch this, you must interact with like institutional investors or people building solutions on it. Um, do you think that there will be like a like a big unlock in a sense that people will be, or like institutions will be motivated to leverage this for much more kind of like a DeFi use case or financial use cases?
Absolutely. I think Ika checks a lot of boxes for a lot of different segments that, as you said, and by the way, I believe rightfully so, right? Said, I'm not trusting anything with my Bitcoin. No way, right? And there are a lot of, so for one is of course security, right? On Bitcoin, I know that, someone needs to hack me personally in order to take my Bitcoin, right? If someone hacks anyone else, my Bitcoin is safe. This is the same guarantee that we want to have. So if we provide that guarantee, that already unlocks a lot of people who are concerned, rightfully so, about security. And then we have all the regulatory compliance and tax consequences. If I need to take my Bitcoin that is accruing value, and I need to now take it out of my custody, give it to someone, right? I need to then receive a derivative against that Bitcoin. This is a huge issue in terms of compliance, risk management, tax consequences, and I need to pay taxes because I'm like, in most jurisdictions, wrapping an asset is trading it for a derivative, which is a tax event. So all of these things are just instantly solved because I never need to, like, the Bitcoin never leaves my custody. I don't need to put it on the books. I don't need to do like, to trust another party, a custodian holding my assets. The Bitcoin never leaves, the BTC never leaves Bitcoin. I don't need to receive a derivative around it, so there's no tax event. And now I can make it capital efficient. Like what you want to do with an asset, and this is what you can see with real estate, with all of like, the large kind of asset classes, is you want to leverage it. You want to be able to use it in order to take, more liquid assets and invest them and create more yield. So right now, yeah, Bitcoin is very, very capital inefficient. People are largely kind of okay with it because they're relying on like, the increase in value. But if they could actually leverage it, that would be a game changer. Of course they would do that.
Cool. And like this is like the when I think about Ika, sometimes I think, oh, this is like the real chain abstraction. This is like, you basically, in a sense that you interact with like these interfaces and having custody of this asset without in a trustless manner. And there are like chain abstraction is like a narrative, or like crypto is full of narratives, and there's narratives for like chain abstraction, restaking, all these things. Where do you see the some of the biggest risks in those kind of solution compared to something like Ika? We broke it down. It's like it's a bulletproof trustless solution. But what are some of major problems with those other solutions?
So, I mean, you mentioned chain abstraction and restaking. I can say that in chain abstraction today is mostly used to describe these, we call it a collusive structure, right? So a structure where if the participants collude or are compromised, then the assets can be drained. So a federated MPC solution or something like that, or a bridge, like these are definitely things that we think are not going to be part of the future of crypto. The actual narrative behind chain abstraction of abstracting the chain from the user, yeah, of course, this is something that we should do. But I think we should do that in a way that doesn't require them. You don't take away the user decision making by making them more vulnerable, right? You need to keep them at least as secure as they were while you're reducing their decision making. So I think telling users, oh, don't think about chains, but then making them more vulnerable is a very, very bad practice. So that's that. In terms of restaking, I think, I mean, honestly, I think it's trying to solve a problem that doesn't really exist. I think that it's more, people want to create yield for their assets, whether it's restaking, so ETH or staking with Bitcoin, but the yield needs to come from somewhere. And I don't believe that the market hasn't proven that this is an actual problem. So people are willing to pay for it, which will create yield. I don't believe that's the case. So we'll have to wait and see, obviously. But I do believe that security, I believe that economic security needs to be thought of in a different way. I also think that things should rely more on cryptographic security than on economic security. But whenever economic security is kind of necessary, then it has to be tied to real market activity. So in order to provide security, someone needs to actually want to use my things and they need to pay me, right? Ika is a good example. If you want to use Ika, if you want to create a D-Wallet, if you want to sign a transaction to transfer a D-Wallet, you need to pay Ika tokens. And that is used in order to pay for security. So that is a sustainable model. If you're trying to just create security out of thin air, it's not a sustainable model, and I don't believe that will actually work.
And going back to some of the features of Sui as a coordination layer, you mentioned the kind of access controls you get with object-centric data model and consensus protocols like Mysticeti. And you mentioned that you are not actually using it for consensus, but it's to have this, to communicate basically. Could you explain that nuance here? Because I think that's really important here to understand the qualities of Mysticeti compared to other like this,
Absolutely.
other consensus protocols.
So there's something. Okay, let's maybe go back to 2PC MPC. When we created 2PC MPC, one of the ways that we were able to one of the breakthroughs that we were able to improve a lot the performance was that we moved from a unicast model. Unicast means every participant in the MPC needs to communicate with every other participant. So that creates quadratic growth in communication complexity. So the more parties you have, it's n squared. So if you have 3 parties, the communication complexity is 9. If you have 10, it's 100, right? It's very, very fast growth because everyone needs to talk to everyone else. What we did is we were able to move to a broadcast model. And a broadcast model means I broadcast to everyone at once, right? So that makes it linear, n, instead of n squared. And we have different amortization and batching techniques that reduces it to essentially practically O of 1, which is constant. But we'll not go into that. What you do need, though, when you do have a MPC protocol that has broadcast in a, let's call it a Byzantine environment, right? An environment where you can't trust everyone. You need to have reliable broadcast. That is a concept in distributed computing, cryptography, but that's a requirement. You need to have reliable broadcast, which means when I broadcast something, I know that everyone received it, right? Because if not, you can't complete the protocol. And Mysticeti, as a consensus protocol, has a reliable broadcast channel between the participants. And one of the reasons why we initially used Narwhal and Bullshark, then we upgraded to Mysticeti, and now we're going to upgrade to Mysticeti v2. The reason is because you need that in order to create fast latency, especially in the you need that as part of the protocol, and this is something that we are utilizing in order to kind of pass the MPC messages between our signers. So we're not using the protocol as a consensus protocol per se, and we're not like writing it to like a state of a blockchain, but we are using it in order to have reliable broadcasts between our MPC signers in a way that is super performant and, can actually support the performance that we have in our MPC protocol.
So it is like you are running your own like a version of Mysticeti consensus protocol between those signers.
Yeah, so our signers are basically running the 2PC MPC implementation on top of the Mysticeti communication channel.
And this year, there's like going to be Mysticeti V2. So have you looked into it? What do you think about the upcoming upgrade, like from V1 to V2?
First of all, it's amazing, and of course we're always up to date. So we updated from Narwhal and Bullshark to Mysticeti when that was the update, and now we're going to update to V2 as well. I think what Mystic Labs is doing is amazing, and they're basically competing with themselves because and it's funny because we also published 2PC MPC V2 a week ago or a couple of weeks ago. And we're also kind of competing with ourselves at this point because we had 2PC MPC with all these breakthroughs, and now we have like V2, which has even more breakthroughs and even more efficiency. So I think this is kind of what serious teams do: is they like define the state of the art, and then they improve upon themselves and create the next best state of the art, the next best state of the art. So definitely that's what I think about Mysticeti V2, and yeah, I'm happy that there's an amazing team like Mystic Labs that is helping solve a lot of the hard problems. So, we could focus on the hard problems that we wanted to solve and not solve all of the hard problems in the world.
And like going back to the just like in crypto, as we talked about, like there are like a lot of narratives. There is this narrative of settlement layer. There's this lot of other narratives, but coordination layer is basic. A lot of people also see that as a narrative. Or Walrus is proving that it's not a narrative. It's actually a real use case where you can actually leverage this Sui as a coordination layer for these off-chain activities. So what do you think once you start like protocols like Ika or Walrus going live, what would be the knock-on effects that incentivizes other people to do the same on Sui Network?
So I think eventually the biggest incentive is if you don't do that, your competitor will and they will win, right? That's the biggest incentive. So if Walrus is going to win storage because they're built on Sui, and we are going to win threshold cryptography and interoperability because we're built on Sui, right? If we decided to go with someone else, and someone would copy our tech and just do it on Sui and be better than us, right? So this is the best motivator. The best motivator is if you want to win, you need to use the best infra. And I think if we look at things like privacy, things like, there are a lot of big categories in Web3 that all of them inevitably will be coordinated on Sui, because if you don't do it, then your competitor will and they will be better, right? So eventually this is like the biggest driver of innovation is, where is the best tech? Where can I create the best results? And that's why I think Sui will win. And in the next year, we are going to see more and more of these type of use cases coordinating on Sui. We're already seeing things around AI, but we're just going to, there's a 3D OS, I think, that do like 3D printing. It's like supply chain, basically. I think you're going to see a lot of supply chain use cases on Sui. So yeah, this is, it's a pretty easy prediction to make, because this is how a competitive market works.
I think that's a fantastic note to end the podcast. So David, thank you so much for taking the time and explaining basically, breaking down all those concepts and walking us through the whole solution you're building. And I'm looking forward to Ika mainnet. And one thing I should say is that the Ika's marketing is fantastic. It is I couldn't myself do the dance, but it seems like people really enjoy and the marketing works really well. So whoever is the bigger brain behind it needs
Yeah.
needs a big appreciation. So
So that's Illumi, by the way. A lot of credit. He is a one-man army, and he's doing an amazing job. And I think getting people excited about deep tech projects is very, very difficult, and he's doing just a fantastic job.
yeah. So hats off to Illumi for that great work. And when should we expect Ika to go? Like, not as a specific date, or like, you can. How would you answer that question?
I would say it's very, very, very soon. And we're going to also announce the date very soon. So maybe, I don't know if by the time this podcast goes live, but if not, then shortly after, you will know the date.
Cool. So thank you, David. Thank you for being here, and looking forward to the next chat.
Awesome. This was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in. And before you go, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more updates and insights. Your support is what keeps these videos coming. So see you in the next video.